A possibly progressive hypothesis has endeavored to clarify the abrupt, sharp decrease in Delta variation cases in a nation of 125 million individuals. Extraordinary new information from Japan has persuaded specialists that the nation of 125 million has effectively annihilated the Delta variation of COVID-19. For what reason did Japan's fifth and greatest flood of the COVID pandemic, driven by the super-contagious Delta variation, out of nowhere reach a sudden conclusion following a determined ascent in new diseases? Furthermore, what made Japan not quite the same as other created nations that are presently seeing a new flood in new cases? 90 days later, the Delta variation prodded record everyday cross-country caseloads of almost 26,000. New COVID-19 diseases in Japan have dipping under 200 as of late. Featuring that drop was the way that no passings were accounted for on November 7th, the initial occasion when had occurred in around 15 months. The country of 125 million has effectively annihilated the Delta variation of COVID-19. Japan persevered through its biggest COVID wave in the pre-fall, with cases cresting at around 23,000 every day in August. Yet, the wave arrived at a sudden halt and has burned out, with the capital Tokyo recording only 16 new cases on Friday. In November, the country has seen an extraordinary rebuilding, recording under 200 cases in most recent weeks, and on Friday enlisted its first day without a COVID passing on in 15 months. The country's capital Tokyo, the world's biggest city home to 40 million individuals, recorded just 6 new cases on Monday. A presumably progressive rule has looked to explain the abrupt, steep decrease in Delta variation cases in a natural of 125 million individuals. Fantastic new data out of Japan has left experts fulfilled the country of 125 million has productively killed the Delta variation of COVID-19. Proprietor of the Nourished Eatery in Taranga Sharna Michelagoat is giving her clients an action item insight under the new structure. Everybody has upheld us for such a long time, and I believe it's really unreasonable that we need to dismiss individuals for their own well-being choices. Ituro Inoue, an educator at the National Institute of Genetics, according to his gathering of analysts, the astonishing answer might be that the Delta variation dealt with itself in a demonstration of self-extinction. New research out of Japan's National Institute of Genetics recommends the strain drove itself towards a characteristic termination. There later a few changes prompted it is not able to make duplicates of itself. Teacher Ituro Inoue says social removing and veil wearing combined with immunization inclusion, which remains at 76% for 2 dosages in Japan, isn't sufficient to drive cases down in the way that they have. On the off chance that the infection was fit as a fiddle, cases without a doubt would increment as veiling and inoculation don't forestall advancement contaminations sometimes, Professor Inoue told the Japan Times. He said Delta had closed different variations from taking off yet as it kept on transforming. His group accepts it became defective and couldn't make duplicates of itself. We imagine that eventually during such changes it went directly toward its normal eradication, Professor Inoue said. He says such a peculiarity could happen in different nations. In any case, the main explanation might be identified with the hereditary changes that the COVID goes through during generation at a speed of around 2 transformations each month. As indicated by a possibly progressive hypothesis proposed by educator Ituro Inoue, the Delta variation in Japan gathered an excessive number of transformations to the infection's blunder adjusting, a non-primary protein called NSP14. Accordingly, the infection battled to fix the mistakes on schedule, eventually prompting implosion. New exploration from Japan's National Institute of Genetics recommends the species drove itself to normal annihilation. There later a few transformations left it unfit to make duplicates of itself. As per a possibly progressive hypothesis from Professor Ituro Inoue, the Delta variation essentially collected such a large number of changes in the infection's mistake rectifying protein called NSP14. Professor Inoue says the infection battled to fix the mistakes on schedule, in the end causing its own fall to pieces. The Delta variation in Japan was not difficult to move and kept different variations out. In any case, as the changes stacked up, we accept it in the long run turned into a defective infection and couldn't make duplicates of itself. Considering that the quantity of cases has not expanded, we think it went directly toward its regular elimination eventually during such transformations. They tracked down different hereditary changes at a site inside NSP14, called A394V. These transformations seem to add to a disabled infection that can't duplicate, which could clarify how the Delta variation just disappeared from Japan very quickly. While a few specialists have credited the drop in cases to the country's 76.2% immunization rate and solid adherence to cover wearing, Professor Inoue accepts new diseases would in any case arise assuming that the Delta strain were as yet alive, would be perfectly healthy. In the event that the infection were as yet alive, cases would positively increment, since veiling and inoculation don't forestall advancement contaminations now and again, he said. Educator Takeshi Urano, a specialist at the Faculty of Medicine at Sherman University, said something regarding Professor Inoue's discoveries, guaranteeing the weighty disclosure could be utilized in promising new clinical medicines. Studies have shown that an infection with an injured NSP14 has an altogether diminished capacity to repeat, so this might be an element behind the fast decrease in new cases. The NSP14 comes from an infection, and the substance to control this protein could turn into a promising medication while advancement is as of now in progress. At the point when the Delta variation originally showed up, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention detailed it to be over 2 times as infectious as past variations. Notice it could cause more extreme sickness in unvaccinated individuals. Shockingly, they viewed the inverse as evident. Japan, referring to 2 likely reasons. The initial is that the infection transformed itself into a state where it couldn't repeat successfully, another hypothesis set forward by a top Japanese hereditary specialist recently. The second, that old staple of scheme scholars and phony news merchants, the counter-parasitic medication ivermectin, which is present can't seem to be demonstrated to be compelling against COVID-19 in any legitimate clinical preliminary. Falsehood sites likewise got on the cases. The 2 speculations have critical issues notwithstanding. As indicated by Takeshi Urano, an educator at Sherman University's Faculty of Medicine who was not engaged with the examination drove by Inoue. No genome information exists, so it's simply a theory, but since it has vanished, it won't ever come around again, he said. So what are the possibilities that we could see a comparable regular elimination abroad of the COVID-19 causing SARS-CoV-2 infection? Certain individuals might contemplate whether the self-annihilation of the Delta variation in Japan was brought about by something particularly amazing in the hereditary makeup of Japanese individuals, yet Inoue clashes. I don't think so, he said. Individuals in East Asia, like Koreans, are ethnically as old as. Yet, I don't have the foggiest idea why this perception was made in Japan. Studies have uncovered that more individuals in Asia have a protection catalyst called APOBEC3A that assaults RNA infections, including the SARS-CoV-2 infection that causes COVID-19, when contrasted with individuals in Europe and Africa. So the scientists from the National Institute of Genetics and Niigata University set off to figure out how the APOBEC3A protein influences the NSP14 protein, and regardless of whether it can subdue the movement of the COVID. The group directed an investigation of the hereditary variety information for the alpha and delta variations from contaminated clinical examples in Japan from June to October. The group directed an investigation of the hereditary variety information for the alpha and delta variations from contaminated clinical examples in Japan from June to October. Professor Inoue conceded that without the delta variation, nobody should keep under control the new variations in Japan. Up until this point, the master said it is too hopeful to even think about accepting that the COVID infection will encounter a comparable decrease around the world, as occurred in Japan. The possibilities aren't zero, however that appears to be extremely hopeful at the present time, he said. Right now, the Japanese master says it is still too hopeful to even consider accepting that the COVID-19 causing SARS-CoV-2 infection will encounter a comparative decrease around the world. The chances are not zero, yet that appears to be excessively hopeful right now since we can't get such proof despite the fact that we've taken a gander at various information from different nations, he said.